In this lecture, we'll review the elements of design. Be sure to review the principles of design, which teaches you how to actually use the elements of design in your projects. The first one we're going to talk about is shape symbolism. So there are three basic shapes we'd like to review: rectangular, curved shapes, or angular shapes. Starting with rectangular shapes and squares, these types of shapes are going to indicate familiarity, comfort, security, and a sense of peace. Even when not in focus, they are used in almost every design as a base or frame that gives a sense of stability. This is because angles that form a square or rectangle depict a mathematical order. So use squares and rectangles to establish just a solid foundation or easy grid-like patterns that provide stability. Angular shapes, like triangles, for example, symbolize adventure, intensity, or movement, like getting somewhere, right? So anytime you put angles or angular shapes into your design, you're going to create a sense of action or tension or movement. Whereas curved shapes, the roundness of circles, ovals, and ellipses implies a softness or flexibility, motion, and fluidity. So they also represent continuity and completeness, the circle of life, for example. So using this type of symbol is going to create a certain type of emotion and reaction, whereas using an angular is going to create a different one, and using rectangles will also create a different type of feel. You can combine all of these together, but that's a much more advanced level type of design. The next element we want to talk about is size. By using scale and proportion in graphic design, you can convey meaning and symbolism that will make your design more meaningful, expressive, and creative. For example, you can use a large scale for an element that represents something important or powerful. In my example here, the actual word size, or make it dominant, right? So the bigger something is, the more dominant it's typically going to be. Okay, so scaling or the principle of size is how you can attract attention, right? Now, there are three types of sizes available: large, small, and same. Okay, so if two things are exactly the same size, what's going to end up happening is you're going to create either a sense of balance. So in this case here, the left and the right are equally balanced, or depending on the proximity of those, you can create tension. Okay, so here they're too big for the screen, they're too close together, they are also creating tension on top of the body copy. Okay, so the principle of size: small, large, or the same size. The next element I want to talk about are lines. And in this case, we're talking about two types of lines: just curved lines or straight lines. So a jagged or sawtooth is a collection of straight lines that are connected together, right? What do those lines mean? Okay, curved lines, a majority of the curved lines create familiarity and comfort. They also can or suggest relaxation. Curved lines are very easy on the eyes and very interesting to follow. Curvy lines are also associated with nature and feel very organic. So they creates a sense of movement and motion in a much more subtle way than angular lines would create. So straight lines can create a sense of stability, order, or direction. So they can also imply tension, movement, or contrast depending on the orientation, the length. You could also add the thickness of it. So, okay, so straight lines will move the eye, but it's a little bit more organized than curvy lines. The next element is direction, right? And there are three primary directions that we're going to deal with: vertical direction, horizontal, and diagonal. And direction doesn't have to be just in lines, it can be in any of the elements. For example, horizontal direction makes the composition feel calm and stable. Think of the ocean, grass fields, any type of landscape that is long and wide. Okay. Whereas a vertical direction adds a sense of formality and balance. Here, the verticalness basically in the color pull your eye up to the very top here of this composition. So it can actually help create that balance in dominance in a particular piece, right? Whereas a diagonal direction, diagonal really starts moving and suggesting movement or action here. Okay, so there is a diagonal in the actual text, so my actual sentence there. There's a diagonal, much more subtle movement in the gradient that goes from the bottom left to the top right, from orange to a deep yellow. Okay, so you can create subtle or dynamic suggestions in direction by using the diagonal. Texture. So there are three types of textures that we want to talk about. Smooth texture, okay, rough texture, and soft texture. So in terms of texture, a smooth texture can be used to create an even or consistent look that helps unify an artwork, right? So basically, we have texture here with some solid edges, right? That creates a nice, smooth, even, consistent look, right? Texture that is smooth can also be a gradient, which is gradation, one of the principles that we will talk about in the next lecture. Okay, so that's a smooth texture. A rough texture can be indicative of strength or masculinity, right? So a lot of things that are rough um, tend to be pretty hard or can be hard, right? So they are typically it's a like a dried mud bed is strong and solid, right? It's just hard dirt. So there's some symbolism that is implied inside of these textures, right? And the last one is a soft texture. So a soft texture, such as the soft uh, text here, the headline, the word soft, you can see really basically when you need an emotional reassurance, right? It makes you feel like, oh, that's so soft. I could lay down on top of that. It can be smooth also. So depending on the use of color and the rest of your design principles. But those are the three types of textures, right? So linens, for example, you'd want a soft texture. Whereas if you're in manufacturing of furniture, you might want to choose a smooth texture. Moving on to color. Color is the next principle. And what we're going to be dealing with here is going to be, um, let me turn off some of these here, the backgrounds, sorry. There are PMS colors, are Pantone colors, right? So Pantones is a solid color that offers us tints. We'll talk about that. That's used in printing. CMYK. CMYK is for creating millions of colors, right? So a Pantone might be a silk screen, for example, that is a three-color silk screen, whereas CMYK allows us thousands of colors or, quote, full colors used in printing. RGB is what we look at on our computer screens and TV monitors, right? It's used for online. Hexadecimal colors are also used for screens, mostly in web development, since it's a smaller subset and a different way of addressing the colors, whereas RGB is millions of colors. Hexadecimal is a smaller group of those that we'll be using in our web projects here. That leaves our final element of value. Okay, and value is a value range, how the lightness or darkness of a color. Okay, so for example, reds and greens are value 5 or 50%. So, for example, if you would take a red or green and put it on a black and white photocopy machine, it would turn into a 50% gray. Your yellows tend to be in the 10%, right? They're lighter colors, where blues can exist anywhere from a 30%, like a light blue, to a ultramarine blue is going to be about 50, 60, or 70%, right? So every color has a value. Now, what I'm talking about value here is let's look at both of these examples vertically, right? We can use value to separate and design foreground, middle ground, and background. For example, the foreground is white here, light in value. And the top one, the middle ground, is dark in value, and the background is gray, suggests sunlight, the bushes are in shadow, and the gray of the sky. Whereas the one below here on this bottom corner suggests that the background, when it's dark, it all of a sudden now creates more of a this tree is in headlights and it's nighttime. So this is called value bracketing. When you use a small subset of values in your design, you are creating a specific mood or feel. In this middle one, the foreground is dark. We've got two different values, right? The one above is kind of like, okay, light color sky. The one below, it's a darker color sky, maybe sunset or sunrise, has a different type of feel. And then the last one here, the middle ground is in your middle grays, right? And the top one suggests a nighttime since the sky is dark, whereas the bottom one suggests daytime. So by grouping your values, in this case, foreground, middle ground, and background, you can actually create different types of feel in your overall design. Now, that's foreground, middle ground, background is not the only way. We can also use value bracketing to create a different mood in a specific piece. Okay. So, for example, here in this one on the top left, we're using a lot of the dark side, right? So from 50% all the way up to 90%, right? When you use the darker values, it creates the illusion of a nighttime type of environment. Now, in this case, if we're using time of day, that is what it communicates. But let's say you are trying to sell, for example, a watch, and you're photographing it on a dark background, right? Watch may occur in this type of environment where it's kind of much more muted, right? The one directly below suggests more of a high noon or late afternoon. We have deep shadows, we have a bright sky. Things in the distance are brightly lit because of that overhead sun. Whereas on the right side, it's more of a foggy type of overcast day. The shadows are very muted, so we're trapped in the middle grays here, right? The one down at the bottom right is much more of a morning type situation where the sun is just coming up. Everything is kind of morning lit and morning bright. This is not sunrise, just kind of early morning, right? Where everything is kind of getting a lot of fill light there. So you can see by grouping your values or using a small amount of them in doing your design, what ends up happening is you communicate a completely different type of emotion. Okay. Now, what are all these? These are the 7 elements of design. So again, shape, curved, angular, or rectangular, size, large, small, or equal size, line, curves, and straights, direction, vertical, horizontal, diagonal, texture, smooth, rough, or soft. Colors, we have RGB, CMYK, hexadecimal, and Pantone or PMS colors. And lastly, value, the lightness and darkness. This is kind of when you create a design, that's what you're physically doing to your surface, whether it's paper or on screen. Now, what that communicates, those are the principles of design, and that will be the next lecture that we'll cover. Thanks for watching.